All right, so this is Zach Kennord on DevSecOps, the good, the bad, the ugly. With me today, I have a special guest, Larry Maccherone from Comcast, who's the DevSecOps lead there.
Hi, Zach. Thanks for having me on today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, Larry. Thanks for joining me. So just to start out today, I wanted to kick off the interview with just ask you, what is DevSecOps? You've been doing a lot of talks on the subject and figure you can help us with that definition.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with that phrase, actually. So on the one hand, I think that if you're doing DevOps correctly, you're going to take the security aspect into account. But on the other hand, I recognize that a lot of folks don't realize that when they hear the phrase DevOps. And if I want to have people understand the perspective that I'm coming from when I talk about it, that is, security included, I have to say DevSecOps. So there's my love-hate relationship. But I have the same definition for both DevOps and DevSecOps. It's essentially empowered engineering teams taking ownership of how their product performs all the way to production, including security.
Yep. No, that's great. That's great. I love that, Larry. Completely agree with that statement. And then, so when you've been rolling DevSecOps out at your organizations that you've worked with, not just where you're at currently, what have, how have you done that? What approach have you taken?
Yeah, so, I was a serial entrepreneur and my first business was factory floor automation. I had software. We wrote software that was involved in power generation for GE power generation turbines. We wrote the controls for GE power generation.
Okay.
So if the bad guys could get a hold of a vulnerability, identify a vulnerability in that software, they could attack it. And so I got really good at writing software that was essentially vulnerability free and developed a whole framework for how you do that. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon because they invited me up there. They wanted to essentially package this. So I went to Carnegie Mellon to change the world. And we launched this thing called Build Security In, which some folks have heard of, but in general, it was a dismal failure. We had almost no uptake of the framework in the industry. And I realized that the one of the two key things I was doing wrong is that I wasn't a student. I was a student of software engineering and I was a student of security and safety and writing excellent code, but I wasn't a student of how you get people to change their minds about things. And so I started developing concepts and reading and learning about that. And so I developed a three-part framework for how you actually do cultural transformation for development teams. And I originally applied that for big agile transformations at places like, Intuit and Adobe and USAA. And then eventually I applied it to DevOps transformations, again, big companies like that. And now I'm applying it to DevSecOps transformations. It's a three-part framework that we're using. And the first part of the framework is win the hearts and minds of the development teams. And that's tough for traditional security folks to do because there's this lack of trust between the two groups. They all think the other doesn't get it. One side doesn't think the other doesn't get it, and it goes both ways. So you have to have a different way of sort of getting over that. And I have this thing called the pledge, which is sort of the primary way I go about getting over that with development teams. So that's part one of the three-part framework. Is win their hearts and minds, build trust. Part two is provide a very gradual on-ramp of what to do. So you read these NIST and industry-wide credit card industry PCI standards, and it's got a laundry list of dozens of things and sometimes hundreds of things. And the policy statements from these companies, enterprise companies like Mars, are hundreds of statements long. And the developers, you're like overwhelmed. And so you have to provide just sort of, here are the three things you should work on today. And I'll come back to you in 90 days. I won't come back to you in 90 days, but I'll work with you over the next 90 days to just work on those three. And then at the end of that 90 days, we'll then pick another three, the topmost ones. So gradual on-ramp, make it very obvious what the next thing to do is.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is executive sponsorship. Essentially involve the executives, have this top-down motivation, gamify it, Make sure the whole organization is really focused on just this small handful of things at first, and then you can broaden that list of things as you gain more maturity throughout the organization. And so that's the 3-part framework for agile transformation, and I'm using that to do DevSecOps transformation at Comcast now.
Yeah, no, that's great, Larry. So what were some of the challenges that you potentially encountered along the way? Because I'm sure there were some, right?
Yeah. This is the tricky interview question of, what's your weakness, right?
Right.
Well, I'll give you two. My first challenge was really in terms of talking to the 400-person security organization at Comcast. So
Yeah.
the woman who helped me launch Build Security in 15, 20 years ago, Nooper Davis, is now the CISO at Comcast. And she brought me in essentially to do the same thing at Comcast. But the rest of her organization, she just started at that job when she brought me in, was really a very traditional security thinking organization. And DevOps is about, empowering engineering teams and making them sort of develop automation that improves the quality and that verifies the quality and safety and security of the product. Whereas the security folks are used to independent gating. You can't trust them. You have to give it to us, and we'll take a look at it. And that's going to take 3 weeks.
Right.
No. DevOps wants to deploy multiple times a day, and so you have to switch their mindset from, I want to verify the artifact that the development teams are producing, to, I just want to have influence over the process that the development teams use. I want to give them the easy button for doing it the right way from a security perspective. Give them the easy button, not make it easy for me to do it for them.
Right.
And so it's really tough. I still run into this today. The vast majority of security people want to independently gate the product. So that's a mindset one that I've learned how to get over that for the most part, and I can help coach other leaders who were trying to launch a DevSecOps transformation program to get over that. But we made a more sort of fundamental, sort of lower level mistake very early on in the program. I don't know if you want, is this going to be like bonus points if I give you 2 instead of 1?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've heard the phrase shift left, right?
I have. Yes.
Yeah. So there's a gentleman, Jeff Williams, co-founder of OWASP. He says that sometimes it feels more like shit left. I when I made the mistake I'm about to make, it was really, it was that. So to this day, my direct supervisor at Comcast refers to my program as the shift left for security program, and I don't have a problem with that. It's perfectly fine, But the first thing we did is we said, well, you can't get any further left than the developer's desktop. So let's, look for tools that run in their IDE and run on their desktop. Mm-hmm. And we got almost no uptake of those tools. And what we found was that the developers on their own are curious about what the tools are going to report about their product, but there's no motivation for them to actually resolve it when it's just a desktop run. They run it a couple times, they see the results, maybe they fix a few things, and then they forget about it. Right. So you have to bake it into the process as we're learning from that. So we had to shift a little bit less left to the pull request that the developer is doing, so that it's standard for every commit essentially gets the running of these tools, and they have to meet policy before that pull request is accepted into the code base. And so that was a learning that took us a while, and it was a pretty painful learning because we bought tools that were optimized for sort of IDE usage. And when we started to try to do this integrate into the pull request lifecycle work, which is working out brilliantly, by the way, now is great. The tools that we originally acquired were not well suited to that, and so we had to do a reacquisition of tools, and I had to eat some crow about the tools I chose a year earlier. No, we no longer like those. We got new ones we like better.
Hey, that happens. That happens, right? Yeah. No, that's great feedback. It's interesting that you said, I did an interview with Jeff Lockwood, who leads the security team, and he mentioned the same thing, right? He started with the securities mindset, right? It's been like within culture, not with the developer's mindset, where I think a lot of
No,
people
yeah.
think, right? It's how do we view it? So I thought that was really, really great to hear you just solidify it.
Well, keep in mind, Zach, I'm a developer. I mean, I write code every day. I'm the author of a dozen open source projects, one of which gets 400,000 downloads a month. You know, so I'm not a security person by most people's measures. I happen to be an expert in software security, but my mindset is really developer oriented. But the vast majority of security people are not.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, more and more CISOs are looking for developers to train into security folks for that exact reason.
That's how I hire. That's exactly how I staff
Yeah.
my program.
Yep, no, that's great. So the last question, Larry, which is one that I'm looking forward to. Do you have any myth busters for DevSecOps that are out there?
Well, yeah. So you must have read about or saw my the intro to my RSA talk. You know, it was about my gal, the truth, and she's a beauty, but she ain't always kind of thing. I wouldn't have thought of that as Mythbusters, but that's an interesting way of thinking of it. So I published a study at RSA that correlated particular practices. We looked at about 15 different practices. I correlated them individually with security outcomes like vulnerabilities that you could see on the wire, incidents, those sorts of things. And most of those things were, yeah, we knew that would be good. We knew that would be great. But a couple of them were sort of like, that we expected that to be good, and it turns out it's only like barely good. And one of them, what we thought would be good, it turns out it's actually negatively correlated with security outcomes. And so there's the my gal, the truth, she ain't always kind kind of thing, Mythbusters sort of thing. So the two myths that we busted, one of which is that you can't get credit for, you can't give credit for partially doing something. So the maturity process we have takes each practice. There's about 45 practices in the overall framework, but there's only 11 that we're focused on right now. And in 2019, there were 9 that we were focused on. We walk them through this maturity from thoughts, meaning we haven't thought much about it. Today's the first day we've heard about it maybe, to words, meaning we're making plans to adopt this practice, to actions. And actions could be 1 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. So it's a pretty imprecise level. And then culture, meaning for every opportunity that we have to do this practice, we do it. You know, so and the original research, we thought we would give partial credit for actions because you're part of the way there, right?
Right.
And it turns out that the relationship between the adoption of practices to actions and reduction in risk is almost zero, is nil almost. For a whole swath of practices, a few are exceptions, they always correlated even in actions, like some of the secure coding training, for instance, is correlated even at actions. But the vast majority of them, you have to take it all the way to culture. You have to take it all the way to the point where this is the way the team does business pretty much all the time. And before you actually get even, you know, any of the value out of it in most cases. So that was a little bit surprising. You know, we were measuring our progress on our program by actions plus culture. Now we're just measuring it. We changed to do to just culture. And then the other thing that we found out, and this could be an anomaly of our ninja program, of our green belt, brown belt, black belt program at security, green belt, black belt at Comcast, but I'm suspecting it's a pretty common problem because we borrowed all the designs of other people's and we got, you know, Pluralsight to help us out with pieces of it. Our secure coding training is highly effective, highly correlates with reduction in risk. None of the other security training correlates positively, and most of it correlates negatively with reduction in risk. And so we're like, why would it correlate negatively? I mean, so what we found is that what we think, we had a number of theories, is that it was a selection bias, that the people that were signing up to be a ninja, security ninja, were not on teams that were highly functional, well-performing teams. Maybe they were looking for a career change. You know, and so there was this selection bias associated with this. And then the opposite selection bias is also the case. If you already know this stuff, if you're already pretty good about it and you've already built it into your product, then you wouldn't want to sign up for 40 hours more worth of training and a project you have to do as part of that.
Right.
So the people who are the most likely to have high security, low risk are self-selected out of the pool. And so we're totally revamping our Ninja green belt, brown belt, black belt program as a result of this, and we're putting a much heavier emphasis on the secure coding training and a lot less on any of the other, what's encryption symmetric versus asymmetric encryption, what is CIA. I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase in the security world.
No.
Confidentiality, integrity. There's a lot of concepts that are taught in the 40-hour version of the program, but the only thing that really provided any value was just the secure coding training aspect.
Man, yeah, that's why would you want to give anything else then? No, that's really interesting, Larry. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here. This was phenomenal. Where do you have like a link? I know you give a lot of talks. Is it on your LinkedIn profile that people can find that, or what's the best way to get some of the content that you produce?
Yeah, I post everything on LinkedIn. So if you sign up, if you can't find it easily on LinkedIn, linked to one of my recent posts, then just ping me in with a message, and I'll be glad to send you a download link for it. So
Perfect. Hey, that's great, Larry. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on here and share about DevSecOps.
Thanks for having me, Zach. It was my pleasure.